I never saw myself as a rebellious woman. On the contrary, I always did my best to be what was expected of me. Since I was a child, I was taught that obedience was a virtue, that God blesses those who follow His laws, and that questioning certain things was somehow like doubting the faith. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 48 years old, a businesswoman, and I was raised in the church. From a young age, I learned that marriage was sacred, an unbreakable bond meant to last until death, no matter what. At 22, I got married, believing I was fulfilling my purpose and following God's plan for my life. In the beginning, everything seemed perfect. My husband, Mark, was respected in the church, came from a traditional family, and everyone around us saw us as a role model couple. The affectionate words faded away, loving gestures became rare, and over time, respect vanished. I tried to ignore the signs, praying every night for God to restore our marriage, to bring back the man who once held my hands at the altar and promised to love me. But instead, there were betrayals. The first time I found out, I was overwhelmed by a despair I had never felt before. I prayed, fasted, and cried out. I was advised to forgive. I was told that God hates divorce, and that if I wanted to be a woman of faith, I should fight for my marriage. And I fought. I stayed silent, swallowed the pain, and kept going. But it happened again and again, and each time, a part of me died a little more. I couldn't understand. If God had joined us in marriage, why did He allow my heart to be broken so many times? Did He want me to stay, enduring everything just to keep up the appearance of a marriage that no longer existed? Yet, I stayed. For years I remained by Mark's side, carrying a weight that grew heavier every day. But the truth was, my faith was wearing thin. I knelt down to pray and felt nothing. I sang praises, but the words no longer resonated. I saw happy couples at church and wondered if I would ever feel that again. And then, one day, everything finally fell apart. The betrayal I feared the most came to light, no longer as a hidden secret behind closed doors, but as a public humiliation. Everyone knew. The whispers in the church hallways became impossible to ignore. The pitying glances from the sisters, the whispers of women who pretended to be on my side, but secretly judged me for not being wise enough to keep my marriage together. That day, something inside me broke completely. For the first time, I allowed myself to ask a question I had always been afraid to voice. If I stay here, am I obeying God or just destroying myself? What followed wasn't a clear answer. It was emptiness, an overwhelming silence that haunted me for months. And then, I made the hardest decision of my life. I asked for a divorce. The reaction was immediate. The same people who had once looked at me with pity now regarded me with disdain. I lost friends. I was pushed out of ministries. It didn't matter what Mark had done. To many, I was to blame for not holding on till the end. And that's how I began my new life, rebuilding from scratch. It wasn't easy. I no longer attended church as I once did, not because I stopped believing in God, but because I felt there was no longer a place for me there. I became a stranger in my own faith. Then after years of loneliness, I met Stephen. He was different. He treated me with kindness, respected me, looked at me in a way I thought I'd never feel again. I fought my feelings for a while, but deep down, I knew I was in love. When he proposed, my heart wanted to say yes, but my soul trembled with fear. I spent sleepless nights searching for answers in the Bible, talking to pastors, hearing opinions from all sides. Some said I would be committing adultery. Others said God saw my heart and would allow me to start over. But deep down, there was one question no one could answer. If I marry again, will I still have salvation? I didn't know, and it was with this doubt that I stepped into this new chapter of my life. Stephen and I got married in a simple ceremony without the glamour of my first wedding, but with a love I had never felt before. For the first time, I felt whole, truly happy. But no matter how hard I tried to push the thoughts away, no matter how much I wanted to believe that God wasn't against me, the doubt lingered, whispering to my heart every night. What if God really saw my marriage as a sin? What if, in the end, This choice separated me from him forever. It was in this state of anguish that I came to the night that changed my life. That early morning, I woke up with a tightness in my chest, an unusual heaviness, as if something invisible was pressing my body down against the mattress. My heart was racing. I tried to call Stephen, but no sound came out. I wanted to get up, but my legs wouldn't respond. The room seemed to darken around me. The walls blurred before my eyes, and then everything fell silent. I no longer felt pain or fear, but when I looked down, I saw something that took my breath away. I was still there, or rather, my body was still there, and I was outside of it. Pain struck me like lightning, a shock that rushed through my chest and made my heart skip a beat. I tried to move, tried to take a deep breath. My body refused to obey. My muscles were stiff, as if an unseen force was pinning me to the bed. My mind screamed, but my mouth stayed still. I tried to call Stephen, who was sleeping beside me, but no sound came out. That's when I felt it. First, an intense cold, as if my body was submerged in ice. Then the sensation of being pulled away, as if something was wrenching me forcefully from the reality I knew. Then, silence. The room dissolved around me. Everything became hazy, and for a moment, I thought I had fainted. But when my vision cleared, I saw myself. My body was still there, lying next to Stephen. My eyes were closed, my skin pale, and my chest wasn't moving. My heart had stopped. Despair overwhelmed me. This couldn't be happening. I tried to touch my own arm, but my hand passed through my skin as if I were made of air. I took a step back, and in that instant, the truth hit me like a punch. I was dead. The idea struck me so hard I felt the world spin around me. I wanted to scream, to fight against it, but there was nothing I could do anymore. Time seemed to stretch and contract all at once. I don't know how long I stayed there just watching, trying to understand what had happened. It felt like a dream, but I knew it wasn't. Everything was so real, yet different at the same time. The colors of the room seemed more vibrant, yet also more distant. The air was thick with something I couldn't explain, as if every particle around me was alive. That's when I realized I was no longer alone. At first, I thought it was my imagination, a distorted reflection of what was happening. But then I felt a strong, intense presence. I turned slowly, and in that moment, I realized the floor was gone. There was no ceiling, no walls. The room, my house, my life, everything seemed to be fading away, as if it were just a distant memory. And now, in front of me, there was something calling me. It was a dark, deep void, like an endless road, and I was being pulled toward it. My feet, or whatever I had at that moment, began to slide forward. The cold intensified, and with it, a weight took hold of my soul. Something was waiting for me, and for the first time, I felt a fear that was not just human. It was something much greater. I tried to resist, tried to fight against that invisible force, but there was nothing to hold on to. It was as if I were being drawn into something I couldn't comprehend. Then I heard a sound. At first, it was a distant murmur, like voices whispering inside a tunnel. But as I approached that darkness, the whispers turned into screams. Screams of despair, screams of pain, cries coming from every direction, as if a crowd were calling for help. But no one could hear them. I shivered. No, this couldn't be happening. I tried to move back, but it was impossible. The force pulling me was far stronger than I was. Then in the midst of the darkness, something moved. I couldn't see clearly, but I felt that something was there, waiting for me, something that knew exactly who I was. And it was in that moment that I realized the answer I'd been searching for in life was about to be revealed. The darkness seemed endless. The cold grew sharper with every passing second, and the sound of screams around me intensified as if thousands of voices were crying out. A genuine fear settled within me. This wasn't a dream. It wasn't an illusion. Something was about to happen. It was then that I felt a presence. It was unlike anything I had ever experienced before. It wasn't just something around me. It was something that penetrated me, gripping every part of me. It was warmth, but not physical. it felt as if something inside me, something I didn't even know existed, was being illuminated for the very first time. The scream closest to me stopped, the murmurs faded into silence, and suddenly, the darkness began to retreat. The cold vanished, and a gentle, almost imperceptible breeze brushed past me. Then, I saw it. In the midst of that vast darkness, a point of light appeared. At first it seemed small, distant, like a faint star in the night sky. But as I focused on it, it started to grow, expanding until it became so intense my eyes could barely bear it. I blinked instinctively, pulling back, but there was nowhere to hide. The light surrounded me, penetrated me, and everything I had known was consumed by it. I was no longer in the darkness. Now, I stood before him. My whole body trembled. I didn't need to ask who he was. I just knew. Jesus. He was there, not as a static image, not as a distant figure, but as an overwhelming presence that made my spirit bow before him. There were no words to describe it. It wasn't just light. It wasn't just beauty. It was something greater, something that filled everything. My eyes tried to adjust. The light radiating from him didn't burn, yet it was impossible to look it directly. I felt my legs give out, and before I could steady myself, I found myself kneeling before him. Time ceased to exist there. I had no idea how long I remained in that position, silent and contemplative, simply feeling. Then he moved. It was a simple step, but it felt as if the entire universe shifted with him. "Are you still afraid?" His voice wasn't what I had imagined. It wasn't deep and commanding. It didn't roll like thunder, yet it was the most powerful voice I had ever heard. It resonated within me as if spoken directly into my soul. My mouth opened, but no sound came out. Fear still gripped the depths of my being. Then something changed. The light around me began to expand, and suddenly, I was no longer in that place. I was looking at the sky, but not the way I had imagined. There were no golden streets or towering gates. What I saw was something greater, something alive. The very air seemed to pulse with a glow that didn't come from a single source, but from all directions at once. There were beings, entities that defied human description. Some shone like living flames, others shifted shape, as if made of wind and light at the same time. There was no fear there, no pain. It was as if everything was made of a harmony my human mind couldn't grasp. Jesus was still by my side, watching my reaction. This is what waits for those who follow me. My breath caught. I wanted to ask, to understand. But before I could form a thought, something inside me twisted. Because in the middle of all that glory, in the midst of all that peace, a question arose. What if I didn't belong here? What if my choice to remarry had separated me from this place? As if reading my thoughts, Jesus turned to me and said something that changed everything. I still couldn't speak. What I was seeing, what I was feeling, was something my mind couldn't process. The sky was real. God's glory was real. Jesus' presence wasn't a metaphor. It wasn't just a story told in sermons. But the truth was, as beautiful as that place was, something inside wouldn't let me feel peace. The fear was still there. I knew he could see it. Jesus looked at me, and his gaze held no condemnation. There was no anger, no judgment. There was something that broke me even more. Mercy. "Are you still afraid of your fate?" His voice was gentle but carried something I couldn't define. "Do you want to know if you made the right choice?" My chest tightened. Yes, that was it. I wanted to know. I had spent years living in doubt. I divorced because I couldn't bear the pain any longer. But what if I had endured a little more? What if I had prayed more, fasted more, sacrificed more? Would God have restored my marriage? And now, what tormented me was another question. I rebuilt my life and I found love again. But what if, in God's eyes, I was committing adultery? What if I'd been wrong all along? What if, by choosing a new marriage, I had lost my salvation? Jesus was silent for a moment. Then he raised his hand, and suddenly a scene unfolded before me. It was like watching a movie, but I knew it wasn't a movie. It was my life. I saw myself younger, dressed in white, on the day of my first wedding. I saw myself smiling, full of hope. I saw the exact moment I vowed to love until the end of my life. Then the scene changed. Now, I was in a dark room, crying alone, while my husband spoke on the phone with another woman. The scene shifted again. I saw myself kneeling, praying desperately, begging God to show me what to do. It changed once more. I was signing the divorce papers. My hands trembled, my heart pounded. It was like reliving it all over again. And then, the final scene. Stephen and I, my second husband, our wedding, the happiness on our faces, the genuine love we shared. My throat tightened. Then Jesus spoke. "Do you believe I take joy in your suffering?" His question hit me like a lightning bolt. "Do you think marriage was meant to be a burden, an unbreakable bond, even when it becomes an unbearable weight?" My head was spinning. Then he raised his hand again, and new images appeared before me. I saw Moses handing the divorce certificate to the people as an act of mercy for those who were suffering, Deuteronomy 24. I saw Jesus confronting the Pharisees, explaining that divorce was allowed because of the hardness of people's hearts, Matthew 19. I saw Paul advising that if an unbeliever leaves a marriage, the one who remains should not be bound to it, 1 Corinthians 7:15. My mind opened up and Jesus looked at me and said, "I never wanted you to suffer. I never intended for you to be trapped in something that's no longer alive. Do you want to know about your second marriage?" I felt my whole body freeze because he knew. He had always known. And then he said something I'll never forget. I look at the heart. It felt as if everything around me stopped. How many couples live together for decades but have never truly been united before me? How many stay married just out of convenience, without love, without respect, without honesty? I felt a lump in my throat. Jesus continued, "The sin is not just in a new marriage. The sin is in the lie, in selfishness, in betrayal, in using my name to maintain prisons I never created." That was the answer. My marriage was not a mistake. My love was not a sin. God saw my heart. But then, before I could fully process it, he spoke again. "And now you need to go back." My heart started to race. Go back? But I wasn't ready yet. It was at that moment everything began to fade away. I wanted to plead to stay. Every part of me screamed for that moment, not to end, for me to remain there, before him, absorbing every word, every truth I'd never understood before. But when Jesus said I had to go back, I felt a force pulling me backward. Fear took hold of me. I didn't want to leave, not now. I still had so much I needed to understand. So many questions, so many doubts still burning inside me. But there was no choice. The light around me started to dim, and his presence, which had completely enveloped me, began to drift away. The warmth faded, and a heavy feeling took over my whole being. It was like being sucked back by an invisible force, falling back to a place that no longer felt like mine. The sky vanished before my eyes. The light disappeared, replaced by a darkness I didn't recognize, but this time it wasn't a frightening darkness. I no longer felt my body. There was no time, no space. And then, suddenly, the shock. A sharp pain ripped through my chest as if something was being driven inside me. My lungs filled with air abruptly, and my skin felt like it was burning. My whole body convulsed. Sounds flooded back all at once. Voices, people calling my name. I felt hands touch my face, my forehead. "She's coming back." Someone held my hand tightly. My eyes trembled, heavy, but I managed to open them slightly. The brightness hit me like a blow, and everything looked blurry. Then the first clear image I saw was Stephen's face. His eyes were red and swollen from crying. His expression was a mix of relief and despair. He held my hand as if he never wanted to let go. You're here," he whispered. His voice choked. I tried to respond. I was back, but nothing was the same. The weight of my body felt strange, as if it no longer belonged to me. Everything was different. The doctor's voices in the background sounded distant, like mere echoes of a reality I no longer understood. I was no longer the same person. Then a memory flashed. The sky, Jesus, his words, what he showed me. My breath grew shaky. My heart raced. What I had just experienced was real, and how could I explain this to anyone? I looked around. But how could I speak? How could I tell him I had been on the other side, that I had seen the truth about everything I was taught to fear? I wanted to talk, wanted to scream, wanted to share every detail, but my body was still weak. Even worse, there was a fear inside me. My mind began to spin. Would the church that taught me divorce was an unforgivable sin believe I had seen Jesus and that he showed me something different? Would the people who judged me accept that I heard directly from him that God looks at the heart, not just man's rules? And Stephen, how would he react to this? For a moment, I thought I would never return to him. Doubts overwhelmed me in a way I hadn't expected. I had spent my whole life fearing condemnation. Now, I feared it no longer. But I was terrified of something even harder, that no one would believe what I had seen. I closed my eyes for a moment. The silence within me wasn't like before. It was filled with something I still couldn't define. I needed to understand what to do with all of this. I had returned to life, but something inside me was forever changed. In the days that followed, my body was healing, but my mind felt lost in a place no one else could see. I was there, alive, walking, talking, breathing, yet carrying a weight inside me that I couldn't explain to anyone. I saw him, I heard him, I stood before him. And now, what would I do with all of this? In those first few days, I tried to convince myself that I could simply go back to living normally. But how could I move forward when I felt my soul had been pulled from darkness and exposed to the truth? How could I return to living as I had before, after having seen Jesus and heard from him that everything I'd been taught wasn't as simple as I believed? The truth was this: I could no longer ignore the doubt that had haunted me for years. The uncertainty about my divorce, my second marriage, my salvation. Everything had been answered. I was not condemned. God had never intended for me to be trapped in a loveless marriage. He never created me to suffer in silence, carrying a burden that wasn't mine. More than that, he never turned away from me. I had spent so many years believing my mistakes would separate me from God that I never stopped to consider what Jesus had told me so clearly. I look at the heart. Those words echoed within me every day because now I understood. It wasn't about a piece of paper signed at a registry office. It wasn't about the rules that men created. It wasn't about traditions, doctrines, or human interpretation. It was about the heart. It was about truth. It was about God, knowing my soul, and understanding that my decision to marry again was not an act of rebellion, but a genuine desire to rebuild my life in love and honor. And with this understanding, something inside me began to change. I no longer carried fear. I no longer looked back on my past with guilt. For the first time in many years, I felt at peace, but this peace brought something I hadn't expected: a calling. I knew that many others shared the same doubts I had, people stuck in relationships that didn't help them grow, people who believed they were distant from God because of choices they made in moments of pain, people burdened by fear and guilt without ever having asked him directly what truly mattered. And then, for the first time, I spoke up. I shared with Stephen, my family, and some close friends. Not everyone believed me. Some looked at me skeptically. Others tried to convince me that my experience wasn't real, that I had been deceived, that Jesus would never say such things. But I knew, because I saw, because I heard, and above all, because I felt God's presence within me like never before. And now I had a mission. Jesus revealed the truth not for me to keep it to myself, but so I could share it, to help those still trapped by the same chains that once bound me. So that's what I did. I started studying God's Word with fresh eyes, seeking answers directly from Him, without fear, without human restriction. I began to live my faith with truth instead of fear. And now, if there's one thing I can leave with you who have listened this far, it's this message. The Lord looks at people differently than humans do. Humans look at outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. 1 Samuel 16:7. That's what Jesus showed me. For years I lived in fear. But in that moment before him, I understood that God never saw me the way people did. He never condemned me like so many voices around me did. He looked at my heart. And if you carry any doubt, if you live in fear of being far from God because of what someone told you, I invite you to do something that took me a long time to have the courage to do. Ask him. Because the answer has always been there, but there's something more you need to know. This story isn't the only one. Many people have faced the fear of divorce and carried the guilt of feeling outside God's grace. However, one woman, in a near-death experience, received a shocking revelation about divorce, and what Jesus told her could change everything you've ever believed. If this story made you think, watch this other video now. The answer you're seeking might be there.